I never imagined that the day I finally got the keys to my own apartment would also be the beginning of my biggest nightmare. Standing in my cozy living room surrounded by boxes and the smell of fresh paint, I felt like I had finally made it. At 25, after years of struggle and living paycheck to paycheck, I owned something that was completely mine. The inheritance from my grandmother had made this dream possible, and I was grateful every single day. My mother had abandoned me when I was 15, leaving me with Grandma when she decided she needed to find herself. 10 years of complete silence. No birthday calls, no Christmas cards, nothing. But then my phone rang that Tuesday evening, and everything changed. Before I tell you about the call that turned my world upside down, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like button to support real-life stories like this one. Subscribe so you do not miss any of my upcoming shares. Now let me take you back to that night when I realized my mother had never really changed at all. The phone number was unfamiliar, but something about it felt familiar too. When I answered, I heard a voice I had not heard in a decade. "Sophia, honey, it is me. It is Mom." My heart stopped. After 10 years of nothing, she was calling me like it was the most normal thing in the world. Her voice sounded nervous, shaky, even as she started asking about my life. How was work? Was I taking care of myself? Did I have enough money? The questions felt genuine, but there was something underneath that I could not quite place. She told me about her new life. She had married a man named Richard 3 years ago, and he came with 2 children from his previous marriage. Emma was 12 and Jake was 14. As she talked about them, I felt this weird mix of emotions. Part of me was excited that maybe finally my mother wanted me back in her life. But another part of me felt this deep hurt because she had managed to create this complete family without me in it. "I know I have not been there for you," she said, and her voice cracked a little. "I needed time to figure things out to become the person I wanted to be. But I think about you every day, Sophia. I want to rebuild our relationship." Those words hit me like a truck. After 15 years of abandonment, after growing up feeling like I was not enough for her to stay, she wanted to rebuild. I found myself agreeing to meet her even though every instinct told me to be careful. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I bought a new outfit, cleaned my apartment until it sparkled, and practiced conversations in the mirror. I kept thinking about all the times as a kid when she would promise things and then disappear. She would say we would go to the movies next weekend, and then she would not come home for 3 days. She would promise to help me with homework, and then I would find her passed out on the couch. My grandmother had been my rock through all of that. She died 2 years ago, and since then I had felt so alone in the world. The idea that my mother might actually want a relationship with me now filled me with hope I had not felt in years. Maybe she really had changed. Maybe we could have the mother-daughter relationship I had always dreamed of. We met at a coffee shop downtown on a Saturday afternoon. I got there early and sat by the window watching every person who walked by. When she finally arrived, I barely recognized her. She looked expensive. Designer clothes, perfect hair, manicured nails. She hugged me like we had just seen each other last week. "You look so beautiful," she said, holding me at arm's length. "I cannot believe how grown up you are." We sat down, and she immediately started pulling out her phone to show me pictures. Richard at some business event. Emma at her dance recital. Jake playing baseball. She talked about Richard's successful consulting business, their house in the suburbs, the family vacations they took. I tried to share too. I told her about my job as a marketing assistant, how I was working my way up at the firm. But when I mentioned buying the apartment with Grandma's inheritance, something shifted in her expression. Suddenly, she was asking a lot of questions. Where exactly was it located? How many bedrooms? What was the neighborhood like? Had I looked into the property values lately? At the time, I thought she was just showing interest in my life. I was so hungry for her attention that I answered every question enthusiastically. But looking back, I can see that red flag waving frantically. She suggested I come meet the family. "Richard and the kids would love to see you," she said. We could have dinner together like a real family. The following weekend, I drove out to their suburban house. It was beautiful, with a perfectly manicured lawn and 2 cars in the driveway. Richard answered the door. He was polite but distant, shaking my hand like I was a business acquaintance rather than his stepdaughter. Emma and Jake were friendly enough, but it was clear they saw me as an outsider. I was the weird adult daughter their stepmother had mentioned once or twice. Watching my mother with those kids was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. She was attentive, asking about their homework, praising their achievements, being the kind of mother I had always wanted. During dinner, the conversation revolved entirely around Emma's upcoming dance competition and Jake's baseball season. I might as well have been invisible. At one point, my mother looked around the table and said, "It is so nice to have a complete family again." The words cut through me like a knife. Complete family. Again. As if I had never been part of any family at all. After that dinner, my mother started calling more frequently. At first, I was thrilled. Finally, we were building the relationship I had always wanted. But gradually, I noticed that every conversation somehow turned back to my apartment. "Are you managing okay with the mortgage payments?" she would ask. "Living alone must be expensive. Are you sure you can handle all those monthly expenses on your own?" She would bring up the property value constantly. Had I had it appraised lately? Did I know that property taxes would probably go up? Was I prepared for major repairs if something went wrong? It felt like she was trying to plant seeds of financial worry in my mind. Then Richard started joining some of our phone calls. He would ask what he called practical questions about property investment and tax implications. He seemed to know a lot about real estate law, which should have been another red flag. "You know, Sophia," my mother said during one of these calls, "you might be struggling more than you realize. Sometimes young people think they can handle homeownership, but there are so many hidden costs." She started suggesting that I might want to consider alternatives. Maybe I could get a roommate to help with expenses. Maybe I should think about whether such a big place was really practical for someone my age, living alone. Then came the sob story. Richard's business was facing some difficulties, she told me. They might lose their house. Emma and Jake needed a stable environment, especially with Emma's dance competitions and Jake's important baseball season coming up. The kids had already been through so much with their parents' divorce, and now they might have to change schools. "Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all live together as a real family?" she asked. "You have all that space, and we could help you with expenses. It would be temporary just until Richard gets back on his feet." The emotional manipulation was thick. "I was not there for you when you were growing up," she said, her voice full of fake sincerity. "This could be my chance to make it right. We could finally be the family we should have been all along." "Think of Emma and Jake," she continued. "They are just kids. They need their home, their stability. You could help give them that." I found myself torn between my desperate desire for a family connection and this growing suspicion that something was not right. At night, I would lie in bed going over our conversations, trying to figure out why everything felt off. That is when I started doing some research. I looked up property laws, inheritance rights, tenant laws. I wanted to understand my legal position if I did decide to help them out. What I found made me nervous. There were all kinds of ways that temporary arrangements could become permanent, especially when family relationships were involved. The pressure started escalating. My mother began visiting my apartment more frequently, and she started bringing Richard and the kids along. "Just to see the place," she would say. But once they were there, Richard would walk around measuring rooms and talking about renovations that would be needed if they were going to live there. Emma and Jake started acting like the apartment was already their future home. Emma rearranged the books on my shelves and asked if she could paint one of the bedrooms pink. Jake sprawled out on my couch watching television and complained that I did not have the gaming system he wanted. During one visit, Emma looked at my mother and asked, "When are we moving in, Mom?" My mother just smiled and said, "Soon, sweetie, very soon." That night after they left, I sat in my living room feeling like my own home had been invaded. These people were talking about my space, my sanctuary, like it was already theirs. And my mother was encouraging it. The conversations became more aggressive. My mother started using guilt trips about my grandmother. "Your grandmother would have wanted family to stick together," she would say. "She would be disappointed to know you are not helping family when they need it most." She would get emotional crying about how hard it was to possibly lose their home, how scared the kids were, how this was tearing their family apart. "If you really cared about family, you would help us," she said, during one particularly intense phone call. Then Richard dropped the bomb that changed everything. During one of their visits, he casually mentioned that he was actually a lawyer. He started talking about inheritance complications and how sometimes these things were not as straightforward as people thought. He suggested that I might not have clear title to the property, that my grandmother's will might have been improperly executed. He threw around legal terms I did not understand, talked about probate court and potential challenges to inheritance. He made it sound like if anyone wanted to contest my ownership, I could lose everything in legal fees just trying to defend myself. "I am just looking out for what is fair," he said, his voice taking on this threatening tone. "Family should share family assets." My mother supported him completely. "Richard knows about these things, honey. He is just trying to protect everyone's interests." I realized that this had been planned from the beginning. They had not reached out because they wanted a relationship with me. They had targeted me because they knew about my inheritance. They had researched me, found out about my grandmother's death, found out about the apartment. And then they had crafted this whole emotional manipulation campaign to get their hands on my property. The discovery of their real plan happened by accident, but it changed everything. I had stopped by their house unexpectedly to drop off some documents Richard had requested, related to my grandmother's estate. I was about to knock on the front door when I heard voices coming from the open window. Richard and my mother were in the living room talking on speakerphone with someone. "The timeline needs to be accelerated," Richard was saying. "We need to get the property transferred before she figures out what is happening." "She is so desperate for a mother," my mother's voice said, and she actually laughed. It was cold calculating. "She will believe anything I tell her. I could probably convince her to sign the papers tomorrow if I play the family card hard enough." I stood there frozen as they discussed their plan in detail. They were going to claim that I owed them compensation for my grandmother's care in her final years. Richard had prepared fake documents showing they had paid for medical expenses and home care. They would demand partial ownership of the apartment as repayment. If that did not work, they would claim that my grandmother had promised them the property before she died. Richard knew exactly which legal loopholes to exploit, which emotional pressure points would make me likely to give in, rather than fight. The most devastating part was hearing them talk about the kids. Emma and Jake had already been enrolled in schools near my apartment. They had already planned their new bedrooms, already told their friends they were moving. These children had been made part of the scam without even knowing it. "Once we get the property, we sell it and split the proceeds," Richard said. "The market is good right now. We should be able to clear at least $300,000 after expenses." I managed to record part of their conversation on my phone before I quietly left. I drove home in a state of shock, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. Everything had been a lie. Every moment of warmth, every expression of love, every family dinner had been nothing but an elaborate performance designed to steal my home. The next phase of their plan began the following week. I came home from work to find a moving truck in my parking space. My mother, Richard, and both kids were standing outside my apartment building with boxes and suitcases. "Surprise," my mother called out when she saw me. "We decided to make the move today." The kids were so excited they could not wait any longer. Richard stepped forward with a folder full of papers. "I have been doing research on your grandmother's estate," he said. "There are some irregularities we need to discuss. According to these documents, we have legal claim to at least 50% of this property." He handed me papers that looked official, but were clearly fake. They claimed to show payments my mother had made for my grandmother's care loans she had provided promises my grandmother had made. It was all fabricated, but it looked convincing enough that someone might believe it. "We are not trying to kick you out," my mother said, putting on her most reasonable voice. "We just want what is fair. We can all live here together as a family." "You would not want to fight us on this legally," Richard added, his tone becoming threatening. "Court battles are expensive and time-consuming. You could lose everything just in legal fees." They had tried to change the locks while I was at work, but the building manager had stopped them when they could not provide proper documentation. Some of my neighbors were confused, believing my family's story that they belonged there. Others were suspicious and had called the building management. I found Emma sitting on my couch crying because she was confused about why I seemed upset that they were there. "Mom said this was going to be our new home," she sobbed. "Did we do something wrong?" My heart broke for these kids who were being used as emotional weapons. But I knew I had to protect myself and my inheritance from my grandmother, who had worked so hard to give me security. I looked at my mother, this woman who had abandoned me when I was 15, and was now trying to steal the one thing that represented stability in my life. "I need time to think about this," I said carefully. "Of course, honey," she replied, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Take all the time you need. We will just wait here." But I was not really going to think about giving in. I was planning my counterattack. Over the next few days, I documented everything. I had the recording of their conversation planning the fraud. I photographed the fake legal documents. I got statements from neighbors who had witnessed their attempted lock change. I researched Richard's background and discovered that his law license had been suspended 2 years earlier for fraudulent activities. I contacted a real estate attorney I knew from college and shared all my evidence. She was appalled by what they were attempting and eager to help. We discovered that Richard and my mother had been evicted from their previous house for non-payment of rent. They had a history of running similar scams on elderly people and their heirs. When I was ready, I came back to my apartment with police officers and my attorney. Richard tried to bluster and threaten, but when faced with evidence of his suspended law license and the recording of their conversation, his confidence crumbled. My mother's reaction was the most telling. When she realized their plan had failed, when she saw police officers and heard words like fraud and attempted theft, her mask slipped completely. She started screaming at me, calling me ungrateful, selfish, heartless. "I am your mother," she shouted. "How can you do this to me after everything I have done for you?" Everything she had done for me. The abandonment, the 10 years of silence, and now the attempted theft. That was everything she had done for me. "You are destroying this family," she continued. "Emma and Jake will have nowhere to live because of you." But I stayed strong. "You destroyed your own family when you decided to commit fraud," I said quietly. Richard was arrested for fraud and attempted theft. A restraining order was issued, requiring all of them to stay away from me and my property. My ownership of the apartment was legally confirmed beyond any doubt. As the police led Richard away in handcuffs, my mother made one final attempt at manipulation. "I am still your mother, Sophia," she called out. That has to mean something. But it did not mean what she thought it meant anymore. The immediate aftermath was emotionally devastating, even though I knew I had done the right thing. I grieved not for the mother who had tried to steal from me, but for the mother I had always hoped she could become. I grieved for the relationship I had imagined we might build for the family dinners that would never happen, for the sense of belonging I thought I had finally found. At the same time, I felt enormous relief. I had protected myself and the inheritance my grandmother had left me. My grandmother had worked 2 jobs for decades, saved every penny, and invested wisely so that someday I would have security. She had given me a foundation to build my life on, and I had almost let someone take that away. I felt terrible about Emma and Jake. They were innocent victims in all of this, children who had been manipulated and used. They had probably been genuinely excited about moving, about having a new big sister, about starting fresh in a new place. But they were not my responsibility, and their situation was not my fault. Phone calls started coming in from extended family members. Some were supportive, understanding that I had been the victim of a scam. Others were critical, saying I should have found a way to help family, even if their methods were wrong. These conversations taught me a lot about who in my life actually cared about my well being versus who just expected me to sacrifice for others. I started seeing a therapist to work through the emotional trauma of the betrayal and to address the deeper issues around my childhood abandonment. I learned about manipulation tactics, about how people who have been abandoned often become easy targets for emotional manipulation because they are so desperate for love and acceptance. The healing process was not linear. Some days I felt strong and confident in my decisions. Other days, I wondered if I had been too harsh, if there might have been another way to handle the situation. But therapy helped me understand that protecting yourself from people who want to harm you is not mean or selfish. It is necessary. I started building boundaries with all the toxic people in my life. I learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong, instead of talking myself out of my gut feelings, because I wanted so badly to believe the best about people. Most importantly, I began building what I now call my chosen family. These are friends, mentors, and colleagues who show up for me consistently, who celebrate my successes, and support me through challenges, who love me without trying to take anything from me. I started volunteering with children in foster care, helping with homework and life skills. Working with these kids who had been abandoned or mistreated by their biological families helped me understand that family is not about blood relations. It is about love, respect, consistency, and mutual support. My career started flourishing once I was not distracted by family drama. I got a promotion at my marketing firm and started taking on bigger clients and more challenging projects. I even started dating again, though it took time to learn how to trust romantic partners after experiencing such deep betrayal from my own mother. The property value of my apartment increased significantly over the following years. I considered buying investment properties, building on the foundation my grandmother had given me. Every success felt like a tribute to her memory and her sacrifice. My mother tried to contact me multiple times over the next few years. Sometimes it was apologies and sob stories about how sorry she was, how she had made a mistake, how Richard had pressured her into it. Sometimes it was anger and blame, claiming I had destroyed her life and ruined her marriage. Sometimes it was new manipulation attempts, different emergencies that required my help. I maintained a strict no-contact policy, but without hatred. I had learned the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I could forgive her for my own peace of mind while still protecting myself from future harm. Forgiveness did not mean I had to give her another opportunity to hurt me. Richard ended up serving 18 months in jail for fraud. My mother lost her marriage and her stepchildren when the truth came out about the scam. She had to face the consequences of her choices, just as I had to face the consequences of mine. But I chose protection and boundaries while she chose manipulation and theft. The outcomes reflected those choices. Through therapy and personal growth work, I transformed from a desperate, approval-seeking daughter into a confident, independent woman who knows her own worth. I learned that you cannot love people into treating you well, and you cannot sacrifice enough to earn love from people who are not capable of giving it. I created new traditions for holidays and special occasions, celebrating with friends who had become my true family. I started hosting Thanksgiving dinners for other people who were estranged from toxic families. We would go around the table sharing what we were grateful for, and it was always genuine, never performative. Every year on my grandmother's birthday, I visit her grave and tell her about my life. I tell her about my successes, my challenges, my growth. I thank her for giving me not just financial security, but also an example of what real love looks like. She loved me without conditions, supported me without expectations, and left me with resources to build a good life. The apartment she made possible for me became not just a home, but a symbol of independent security and the power of chosen family over biological family. I learned that some people will try to use your love for them as a weapon against you. They will exploit your desire for connection, your hope for reconciliation, your fear of being alone. But once you understand these tactics, once you build strong boundaries and develop a solid sense of self-worth, those weapons lose their power. Today, I look around my apartment and feel nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for my grandmother's love and sacrifice. Gratitude for my own strength in protecting what she gave me. Gratitude for the friends who have become my real family. And strangely, even gratitude for the experience with my mother, because it taught me lessons about myself and about life that I could not have learned any other way. I hope my story can help someone else who might be facing similar manipulation from family members. Trust your instincts. Protect your resources. Do not let anyone guilt you into giving up your security for their convenience. And remember that the family that matters most is not the one you are born into, but the one you choose to build. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family members? How do you handle relationships with people who put their own needs above your well-being? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if my story resonated with your own experiences. If this helped you feel less alone in your struggles with difficult family relationships, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming adversity and building strong boundaries. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that it is okay to protect yourself from people who want to harm you, even when those people are family. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength, peace, and the courage to choose your own well-being over toxic family loyalty.